I didn't flinch when the hearing aid hit the fire. The plastic hissed, popped, then curled in on itself like it knew it wasn't coming back. My daughter-in-law smiled, said now I wouldn't hear her anymore. What she didn't know was she was right. I'd already stopped listening. The same day I removed her name from every document that still had mine. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The Sunday roast was dry. Helen hadn't cooked it. Nancy had. Still, no one said a word about it. The family sat arranged like mismatched figurines around the long pine table in Helen's old house, plates clinking softly, forks scraping, an uneasy silence cushioned only by the whir of the ceiling fan overhead. Helen sat at the head, her silver hair pulled back, her posture stiff despite the old cushion behind her back. Her hearing aid, small, beige, and slightly chipped, rested next to her glass of unsweetened tea. She had taken it out halfway through Nancy's running commentary about gutter repairs. "Mom, we have to replace the flashing before winter," Nancy said again, pushing her mashed potatoes around. "The water damage in the attic." "Then do it," Helen said, not looking up. "We would, but the deed's still in your name." "Until you sign the release?" I said, "Do it." Nancy closed her mouth, biting back something that looked like the word lawyer. Across from her, Sabrina leaned back in her chair, picking at her nails. Lily, 16 and pink-haired with earbuds in one ear, glanced between her mother and grandmother like she was tracking a ping-pong match no one else wanted to play. Eric, Helen's son-in-law, reached for the gravy boat. "Maybe we can talk about this later, yeah?" His voice was careful, like someone defusing a landmine. That's when Sabrina stood up. She moved with that particular twitchy energy she always had after 3 glasses of wine. More elegance than grace, more speed than sense. She circled behind Helen, pausing only long enough to grab the hearing aid from the table. "What the hell are you?" Nancy started, but didn't finish. Sabrina held the hearing aid up between 2 fingers, smirking. "She's not even using it. Probably just likes seeing us strain our voices." "Sabrina," Eric said sharply, half rising from his seat. But she was already moving. In one smooth, theatrical flick of her wrist, she lobbed the hearing aid into the fireplace. It landed in the embers with a soft thump, followed by a tiny crackle. Then a pop, like a bubble bursting in hot oil. The room went silent, save for the gentle hiss of the flames. Sabrina laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter that echoed off the walls, wild and too loud. Eric froze, fork in midair. Lily's mouth fell open. She pulled out her remaining earbud, staring at her aunt like she didn't recognize her. Helen didn't move. She just stared into the fire, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap, as if the moment hadn't happened at all. "You're insane," Nancy whispered. "That's assault wrapped in arrogance." Sabrina turned to her, still smiling. "Oh, relax. I'll buy her a new one. Maybe a modern one that doesn't smell like mothballs." Nancy rose. "You're not welcome in this house again." Sabrina made a show of saluting. "Noted." Eric looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Lily leaned toward her grandmother. "Grandma, are you okay?" Helen slowly turned her head. Her eyes found Lily's, then moved back to the flames. "Let her think I'm deaf," Helen said, voice low and clear. "I'm just done listening." Lily blinked, caught off guard by the quiet steel behind those words. No one noticed Helen's foot gently pushing the poker deeper into the coals. No one saw the faint smile touch her lips, just for a second, as the last whisper of melted plastic hissed into silence. The bank smelled like printer toner and floor wax. It was the kind of place where the air conditioning was always just a few degrees too cold, and no one ever raised their voice above a polite murmur. Helen sat across from the branch manager in a plastic-sealed office that tried its best to look warm. Fake ficus, framed motivational quotes, and a candy dish that hadn't been touched since pre-COVID. "I'd like statements for the last 3 months," she said, voice calm and precise. "Checking and savings." The manager, a man in his 40s with too perfect hair and a slightly worried brow, smiled like a customer service manual told him to. "Absolutely, Mrs. Marsh. I just need to verify a few things before..." I'm not deaf, Helen said, locking eyes with him. You don't have to speak slow. He blinked. Of course, my apologies. She handed over her ID and waited as he clicked through his terminal. The screen reflected faintly in his glasses, a wash of blue-white light that made his features unreadable. It took him less than a minute to stop smiling. Is something wrong? Helen asked, folding her hands. There's a recent transaction you may want to review before we print everything, he said carefully, turning the monitor halfway toward her. $12,000 transferred to an external account last Thursday. Helen leaned in. Who authorized it? It shows authorization under your son-in-law, Eric Marsh, using joint access privileges. But the signature on file isn't his. It's been initialed SR and signed beneath. Helen's mouth was a flat line. Sabrina Rachel Marsh. I can't say for certain, ma'am, but it does match other electronic forms she's signed. He tapped a few keys. We can initiate a temporary freeze on further transfers and file a dispute. There'll be an investigation and— Do it, Helen said. She stood, straightening her coat. Her eyes didn't leave the manager's. And print everything. I want every transaction since January. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Right away. The back seat of Nancy's Subaru was filled with grocery bags and stale coffee cups. Lily sat beside Helen, chewing her thumb and pretending not to stare at the envelope in her grandmother's lap. They said it was for maintenance, she said finally. Dad told me Mom needed it for stuff around the house. Gutters, siding, something about permits. Helen didn't look up. She was flipping through the printouts with the same care someone might give a will or an autopsy report. Well, she said dryly, then she can maintain explanations in court. Lily sucked in a breath, unsure whether to laugh or be horrified. You're really gonna do that? Helen tucked the envelope under her arm and looked out the window. Sweetheart, she said, voice low, you don't take what isn't yours, not even from family. They pulled into the driveway of the Marsh house, just as the sun was starting to drop behind the pine trees, throwing long shadows across the porch. Helen got out first. Her knees ached, but she didn't show it. Lily followed, arms crossed, unsure whose side she was supposed to be on. Inside, the house smelled faintly of scorched plastic and something older, like dust and bitter tea. The silence was sharper now, not uncomfortable, but alert, like the air itself was waiting. Helen walked into the study and shut the door behind her. She pulled the dusty banker's lamp cord until a warm glow pooled across the desk. Then she opened the drawer and took out an old notebook. Blue cloth-bound, corners fraying, spine cracked. She flipped to the first page. Across the top, in her small, deliberate handwriting, she had written, Marsh House Finances, 2025. She underlined it once. Then she picked up her pen. Her hand didn't tremble. The living room was still. Dust hovered in narrow beams of the October light. Helen sat hunched over the edge of the couch, Lily's old-school iPad on her lap, Eric's phone in her hand. Unlocked. No passcode. He hadn't even bothered to set one after the last software update. Or maybe he thought Helen wouldn't know how to use it. She did. The text thread with Sabrina was near the top, the name saved as S. Helen scrolled. S. Just transfer it. She won't even notice. E. I don't know, it's her account. That feels risky. S. She barely hears, barely looks. It's like living with a ghost. S. You want this deck rebuilt or not? Another pause. Then, E. Fine, one time. But if she finds out, S. She won't. Old Bat can't even read her bank statements. Helen stared at that last one for a long time. Then she pressed the side buttons. Screenshot. Again and again. Dozens of messages, time-stamped. Transferred to the iPad by airdrop. Saved, cataloged. She didn't shake, not even once. At the CVS on Ashbury Road, she didn't use her rewards number. Paid in cash. The hearing aid was discreet, mid-range, with better clarity than her last model. The cashier asked if she needed help setting it up. Helen just smiled and said she liked reading manuals. She didn't tell anyone about the new device. She didn't put it in when she got home. Sometimes silence was armor, and sometimes it was bait. Later that evening, the study was dim except for the orange cone of light from the banker's lamp. Helen set her voice recorder on the desk and pressed record. This is Helen Lorraine Marsh, Today is October 9th, 2025. Time is 7:42 p.m. She glanced at the bank statements beside her, carefully lined up and marked with pink flags. There was an unauthorized transfer from my checking account in the amount of $12,000 on October 2nd. The transfer was initiated by Eric Marsh using shared access. But the signature authorization belongs to Sabrina Rachel Marsh. I did not give consent. She paused, adjusted her new hearing aid, still switched off. On the evening of October 5th during dinner, Sabrina took my hearing aid and threw it into the fireplace. There were multiple witnesses. Another breath. This is my sworn statement of the facts. I have copies of relevant bank documents, texts, and date-verified images. She clicked the stop button. The room was so quiet, she could hear her pulse ticking in her ears. Nancy came by after dinner, hair still damp from a rushed shower, wearing her notary badge and a pair of oversized readers. "You sure about this?" she asked, signing the witness line on the form. Helen watched the pen move. "I am." Nancy sealed the form into a plastic sleeve. "What's your next move?" Helen looked out the window. A wind had picked up. The pine trees swayed against the sky, black outlines against a rising moon. "I'm not going to knock," she said. "I'm going through the front door." Nancy gave a low whistle. "Damn." The next morning, Helen parked outside the legal aid office 3 blocks from the courthouse. The sign on the door read "Appointments Only," but she had called 2 days ago, quietly, privately. She'd spoken to a woman named Michelle, who had listened without interrupting and called her back that same night with a recommendation. Daniel Reeves, former prosecutor, now specialized in elder fraud and financial abuse. The waiting room was small but clean. The receptionist offered her water. Helen declined. A door opened. "Mrs. Marsh?" A man in his mid-50s stepped out, briefcase in hand. His suit wasn't expensive, but it was sharp. He looked her directly in the eye. "I'm Daniel. Michelle filled me in on the basics. Come on back." Helen rose, steady. She followed him into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her. Daniel's office was modest. Legal textbooks lined the walls in mismatched rows, and a framed photo of 2 young boys fishing hung behind the desk. A chipped ceramic mug held a mess of pens. No pretension, just quiet competence. Helen liked that. She moved slowly, but with purpose, and laid the navy blue folder on his desk like she was setting down a chessboard mid-match. Daniel leaned forward, brow lifting slightly as she unlatched the brass clip and flipped it open. Inside, a timeline, typed in 12-point font. Bank statements, each flagged with color-coded tabs. Screenshots printed and labeled, with full message headers intact. A notarized affidavit, signed and sealed. Audio transcript transcribed by hand. Initialed. Daniel gave a low whistle through his teeth. "You could teach my paralegals." Helen didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth tugged upward just slightly. "I've had time." He took a moment, scanning the pages with practiced eyes. His fingers traced dates, figures, notes in the margins. Then he sat back in his chair, steepling his hands under his chin. "You've documented this cleanly," he said. "No gaps. The account was in your name. The access granted informally. You didn't authorize the transfer, and the signature is provably not yours." Helen nodded once. "This crosses the line from moral violation to legal, specifically elder financial exploitation. The fact that you're related doesn't shield them." "I know," Helen said, voice level. "That's not why I'm here." Daniel tilted his head. "Then what do you want?" She looked at him, really looked at him. "I don't want jail. I want distance." Daniel's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "You want to cut them out," he said softly. "Legally, financially. I want control returned. And then I want the door shut behind them." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's possible. It'll take some paperwork. A trust rewrite, revoking access to all joint accounts, reassigning power of attorney if any exists, and—" "There is none," she interrupted. "Never signed one." "Good. Then we start fresh." He pulled out a clean folder and opened a drawer for a blank set of forms. "We'll begin with a financial separation affidavit, followed by a revision of your will. I'll also include a clause limiting their legal claim to your estate. You'll need a witness for the signatures." "I brought one," Helen said. Nancy sat in the corner of the office like a reluctant churchgoer, coat unzipped, arms crossed, watching the process unfold with quiet awe. "Mom," she said finally, as Helen signed the second document. "Are you sure this is the road you want to take?" Helen capped the pen. "This is the road, whether I want it or not." Daniel turned the papers toward Nancy. "Just your witness signature on this line, and the bottom one." Nancy leaned in, signed both spots without hesitation, then glanced at Helen again. "They'll retaliate," she said. "Sabrina doesn't let go of anything without throwing a tantrum first." "She can scream into her deck railing for all I care," Helen said. "Just won't be on my property when she does." Daniel collected the pages, tapping them into alignment. "I'll file these this week. Once the financial split is formalized, we'll pursue civil recovery of the $12,000. If they push back, we escalate." "I don't want a courtroom," Helen said again. "Then let's make them want to settle out of one," he replied. Helen nodded. "Good." She rose from the chair, slow but upright. Nancy stood too. Daniel walked them to the door. As Helen stepped into the hallway, he touched her elbow lightly. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, voice lower, "you're not what they think." Helen looked back. "They never asked what I was." The blinds were half closed in Daniel's office, filtering late afternoon light into bands of gold and shadow across the desk. The hum of the building's air system filled the quiet like white noise. Papers rustled, pens clicked. Every sound felt amplified, measured. Helen sat across from Daniel again, posture straighter this time. Her blue folder rested beside a small cup of coffee gone cold. She didn't touch either. Daniel adjusted his glasses. "Let's go through it once more to confirm intent." Helen nodded. "Go ahead." He began reading, his tone clipped but calm. "Last will and testament of Helen Lorraine Marsh, effective immediately upon signing and notarization." He looked up briefly. "Still fine with using your full name?" "Yes. If I'm going to leave something behind, it might as well sound official," he continued. "Executor and trustee, Eric Marsh, to serve only in the absence of any direct family member not married to Sabrina Rachel Marsh." Helen's eyebrow twitched. "Keep his name. It'll sting more that way." Daniel made a faint sound that might have been approval. Clause 2. Beneficiary designations. Sabrina Rachel Marsh is to be explicitly disinherited, with zero entitlement to assets, property, or inheritance, direct or indirect. Nancy, seated by the window again as witness, let out a quiet whistle. "You're not pulling punches." "I don't have time for half measures," Helen said. "You know what happens when you leave a lock half-latched." Daniel moved on. Clause 3. Primary beneficiary, Lily Grace Marsh, to inherit the estate and holdings in full upon reaching the age of 25 and completion of an accredited college degree. Before that, funds will be held in trust. Helen's expression softened. "That one's for her. She deserves time to grow up before money ruins her judgment." Nancy smiled faintly. "She'll think you're strict." "She can think what she wants," Helen said. "At least she'll be thinking with a roof over her head." Daniel cleared his throat and continued reading. Clause 4. Philanthropic provision. 10% of residual assets to be allocated toward the establishment of the Marsh Hearing Initiative, a nonprofit fund providing free hearing aids and auditory support programs for senior citizens across the county. He paused. "This was your addition?" Helen nodded slowly. "She took one device. I'll replace 1,000. Daniel leaned back, studying her for a beat. "That's poetic." Helen's lips curved. "It's balance." The notary arrived a few minutes later, a woman with a tidy bun and a gold pen attached to her clipboard. The hum of the printer joined the rhythm of signatures. Smooth strokes, initials, stamps pressed into paper like quiet verdicts. Helen signed each page with deliberate care, pausing once between lines as if to make sure every word sank into permanence. When it was done, Daniel slid the stack into a sealed envelope marked "Original Copy," filed. He handed her 2 duplicates, each labeled in bold marker. "Keep one at home, one off-site. The originals stay in my firm's vault." Helen reached into her bag and produced a smaller fireproof case. "Already arranged storage at my bank's safe deposit box." Daniel smiled faintly. "You don't miss steps, do you?" "Not anymore," she said. "I used to give people the benefit of the doubt. Now I give them paper trails." Nancy chuckled under her breath. That ought to go on a t-shirt. Helen ignored her, eyes still on the sealed envelope as Daniel handed it back. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the sun had slipped below the courthouse roofline. Traffic hissed past, headlights dragging lines of pale light across the firm's glass door. Helen and Nancy stepped out into the early dusk, the air cool and crisp. Nancy tucked her hands into her coat. It feels final, doesn't it? Helen locked the briefcase clasp. It feels right. They reached the car before Helen stopped, glancing back toward the office windows glowing faintly behind the blinds. Nancy followed her gaze. Something wrong? Helen shook her head slowly. No, just thinking. About what? Helen watched the reflection of her own face in the glass, a faint, steady outline framed in amber light. About what happens when people finally realize I'm not the one who needs saving. The letter came folded in thirds, stamped with the county seal and delivered by certified mail. Nancy stood in the kitchen holding it like a moldy dish towel. She filed for a mental competency hearing, Nancy said flatly, claiming you're deteriorating, that you're being manipulated. Helen took the envelope without flinching. Manipulated by whom exactly? Nancy raised both eyebrows. You tell me. I'm apparently part of the conspiracy. Helen slipped the letter open and scanned the contents. Her mouth barely moved as she read. Petition to invalidate all recent financial and legal decisions, citing confusion, impaired cognition, and undue influence from non-immediate family. Non-immediate, Nancy echoed. That's bold, coming from the woman who married into this family like she was buying stock. Helen folded the letter once, neatly. It's a desperate move, Nancy exhaled. It's also scheduled. A week later, Helen sat in a carpeted room that smelled like dry erase markers and lemon cleaner. A psychologist in her 40s sat across from her in a soft blazer and flats, tapping a pen against a clipboard. No rush, the woman said kindly. Take your time with each section. Helen didn't need time. She breezed through the orientation questions. Name, date, president, governor. Then came the logic sequences. If a train leaves Chicago at 6 p.m. traveling 70 miles per hour, depends. Is there a headwind? Which line? Are we assuming continuous motion or scheduled stops? The woman blinked. Just use standard conditions. Helen nodded. Then it arrives in about 3.5 hours. She completed every math problem without a calculator, recalled 3 random objects after a 15-minute delay, identified subtle patterns in a block of visual tests. She even corrected the wording in one of the true or false questions. I think you meant may instead of can, she said. Legally, they're different. By the end of the hour, the evaluator wasn't even hiding her astonishment. I have one more question if you don't mind, she said gently. Why do you think your daughter-in-law filed this petition? Helen smiled, polite and cold. Because people like Sabrina don't understand the difference between silence and weakness. Courtroom 3B smelled of floor wax and institutional panic. Helen wore navy slacks, a charcoal blazer, and her hearing aid, turned on this time. She sat at the petitioner's table beside Daniel, her hands folded calmly on a closed leather folio. Across the aisle, Sabrina wore a tight black dress and a forced expression of concern. Eric sat beside her, jaw tight, face pale. Lily was not present. Judge Culver entered, robes billowing slightly. He sat and adjusted his glasses. Let's proceed. Daniel stood. Your Honor, we are submitting both the psychological evaluation and supporting documentation indicating my client's full cognitive competence. He handed over a manila folder, top-tabbed. The court-ordered exam, conducted by Dr. Allison Graff, includes logic testing, memory recall, problem-solving, and personal orientation. All were passed with distinction. The judge flipped through the report. His eyes moved quickly. I see here Dr. Graff's notes, decisive, detail-oriented, and fully competent to manage personal, financial, and legal affairs. No signs of cognitive decline or undue influence detected. Daniel nodded. Additionally, we are submitting notarized bank records, witness affidavits, and time-stamped documentation of all recent legal actions, all consistent with a competent adult acting in full awareness. The judge looked over the rim of his glasses. Mrs. Marsh, would you like to speak? Helen stood. Steady, clear. I may be one hearing aid short, she said, voice crisp. But I am not one neuron short. A low chuckle rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Culver cracked a faint smile. I believe the record reflects that, he said. Petition denied. All rights and documents stand as filed. Court is adjourned. Sabrina stood too fast. Her chair screeched. But the gavel struck once, sharp and final. Daniel placed a hand lightly on Helen's shoulder as the room began to empty. That, he murmured, was a masterclass. Helen turned to him, eyes glinting like wet flint. She tried to put me in a box, she said. I built the lock from the inside. Helen found it the way most disasters are found these days, through the hollow echo of a ping. It was Lily who sent it. Just one text, no commentary, no emojis. A screenshot of Sabrina's Facebook post, public. Helen opened it slowly, thumb dragging upward on the screen. The words came at her in one long block of breathless venom. It's pathetic that the legal system is so broken a manipulative old woman can rewrite history and steal our future. Helen Marsh is being used. If you knew what I knew, you'd be terrified for her too. This isn't over, not even close. Justice. For family, power of attorney fraud, Barbara Drew gaslighting. Helen stared at it, her pulse flatlined. She tapped the three-dot menu in the corner and saved the post. Another button, forward. She typed one name, Daniel Reeves. Message. You'll want this. Send. By the time she'd put the phone down, the post had begun to catch fire. The comment section was a war zone. That woman raised half this town, how dare you? I worked with Helen for 12 years. She's sharp as a tack and tougher than anyone I know. This you? Attached, the court record from the competency hearing, complete with the ruling. If your MIL's losing it, why'd you throw her hearing aid in the fire? Nancy read the thread aloud in the kitchen while stirring lentil soup. She's making your case on Wi-Fi, she said, phone glowing in her free hand. Should we send her a fruit basket or a cease and desist? Helen didn't smile. Neither. We wait. By mid-morning the next day, Daniel called. I saw the post, already downloaded. The comments are a blessing. Helen could hear the clack of his keyboard in the background. The bank flagged the account again. Apparently, the trust officer received an anonymous tip about potential coercion. They're extending the freeze until this is reviewed. Helen adjusted the volume on her hearing aid. Good, Daniel kept going. And we're submitting a motion this week. Every dollar currently frozen, we're redirecting into a temporary restitution fund. It's not about the money, I know. But this gives you leverage, and gives them a very public incentive to back off. Helen's voice was quiet but razor sharp. She wants a war. I'll give her a paper trail so long she'll trip over it. At 3:17 p.m., the phone buzzed again. This time, it was Nancy. You're going to want to sit down for this one. Helen was already seated. She posted again, Nancy said. Except this time, she called you unstable, accused Lily of being brainwashed, and claimed I'm embezzling from your estate. There was a pause. And her employer saw it. Helen blinked. She tagged the company. Oh no, Nancy said. She tagged herself, in the middle of the rant. Someone screenshotted it before she could delete it. Helen looked out the window. The late afternoon sun cast long lines across the porch railing. Damage? HR flagged it. They've launched an internal ethics review. She's in middle management, right? Corporate risk doesn't like the words court or fraud attached to LinkedIn profiles. Helen didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She'll say she was hacked, she murmured. Probably, Nancy said. But the internet remembers. Helen turned the phone over in her palm. How's Lily handling it? She asked. Nancy sighed. She's quiet. Processing. She texted me earlier and said, Grandma's playing chess and Mom's holding checkers upside down. That got a rare smile out of Helen. She's not wrong. That night, Helen sat at her desk, pulling out a small legal pad. At the top she wrote in neat block letters, evidence log, social posts, public defamation. Underneath she added AKI 18, 2:43 p.m., FB post screenshot, targeted language, 43 supporting comments. AK 19, 3:17 p.m., follow-up post, includes libelous claim against minor plus financial officer, employer notified. Then she paused, tapped the pen against the page, and began a new header, pending consequences. She left it blank, for now. Helen was on her second cup of black coffee when the email came in. Subject: Notification of suspension, preliminary review outcome. From HR Department, Arbridge Financial Services. The PDF attachment was just one page. Plain, clinical, final. Following a formal review of public-facing social media activity conducted on October 18, 2025, we have determined that Ms. Sabrina Marsh violated our professional conduct and ethics policy, including clauses related to online behavior, defamation, and reputational risk. As such, she has been placed on indefinite unpaid suspension, pending further internal investigation. Helen read it once, then again. No flare of joy, no dramatic gasp. Just quiet confirmation of what she already knew would happen. She clicked forward. To Daniel Reeves. Subject: Another update. Attachment: HR suspension letter. Message: Falling dominoes. The call came a few hours later. Eric's voice cracked in before she could even say hello. Helen, look, Sabrina? She knows she crossed a line, okay? She's scared. She's sorry. Helen leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the windblown leaves scattering across the porch. She's not sorry, Helen said. She's unemployed. She's suspended, not fired. That's temporary, like her restraint. Eric hesitated. I'm just asking. Please, don't escalate this. Helen let the silence stretch, long enough that the static of the line filled the space like a hiss. I'm not escalating, she said at last. I'm updating. Click. Daniel met her at the courthouse annex later that week. He wore a dark gray suit and an expression of carefully banked satisfaction. They released the funds. Helen raised one brow. All of it? Every penny, including interest from the freeze period. He handed her the signed confirmation document. Beneath the routing details, the words "transfer complete" were bolded. It's in your name, Daniel said, but we routed it directly into the trust. Locked, protected, inaccessible to anyone but you and your designated successor trustee. Helen tucked the document into her briefcase. That's not Eric, I assume. Correct, Daniel said. You named Nancy. Good. He paused before closing the file. You could sue them for damages. Public libel, emotional distress. Helen looked at him evenly. That's not restoration. That's revenge. I've already won the part that matters. Lily's first day at Daniel's office started with file folders, a squeaky office chair, and a yellow legal pad with the words "to be scanned" scrawled across the top. She didn't complain. She asked questions. She took notes. She listened more than she spoke. At lunch, Daniel pulled Helen aside. They stood in the copy room as the Xerox hummed behind them. She's smart, he said. Focused. Doesn't flinch at paperwork. That's rare at her age. Helen nodded. She's never been afraid of the hard stuff, just the quiet it comes with. Daniel crossed his arms. She said you showed her how to keep records, logs, evidence, strategy. I showed her how to stop apologizing for noticing. He smiled at that. You think she'll go into law? She'll go into truth, Helen said, wherever it takes her. That night, Nancy sat on Helen's porch with a glass of white wine and a blanket over her knees. The sky was a velvet gray, stars dimmed by the clouds. You realize what you're doing, right? She said, nudging Helen with her foot. You're training the next generation of silence. Helen didn't blink. I'm training her to understand what people do in silence. Nancy exhaled. And what happens when Sabrina snaps again? She already did, Helen replied. She just did it in public this time. That's not a tantrum. That's a trail. Nancy raised her glass. To consequences. Helen raised her mug of tea. To continuity. Across town, Sabrina sat in her car outside her darkened office building, face lit only by the glow of her phone. On screen, an email draft. Subject line: opportunity to clarify recent events. Her thumb hovered. Then tapped delete draft. The phone buzzed. An alert from a legal blog. Social media and defamation. When the court of public opinion backfires. She threw the phone into the passenger seat and screamed into the darkness. They had to bring in extra chairs. The small claims courtroom wasn't designed for a crowd, but word had spread. Fast. It was Helen Marsh versus Sabrina Marsh. Not a movie, not a headline, but real people with real tension, and the kind of story neighbors whispered about over gas pumps and checkout counters. By 9:43 a.m., it was standing room only. Local small business owners, retirees from Helen's church, a teacher Lily once had in 7th grade. They were all there. The room buzzed in low murmurs. At the front, Helen sat beside Daniel. Her expression was calm, unreadable. She wore a navy suit with a pearl pin, her hearing aid fully visible and turned up. Across from her, Sabrina sat rigid in a too-tight blazer, eyes glassy, lips pressed into a smile that looked more like a splinter. The clerk called the case. Marsh vs. Marsh, case number SC 5973. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. Daniel stood, folding open a thick file. Your Honor, we are here seeking damages totaling $2,148. 13. Cost of replacement for a destroyed medical device, plus punitive damages for willful destruction of personal property and intentional emotional distress. He handed over a receipt, neatly attached to a statement of claim. This is the original purchase invoice from Best Hearing Solutions. Model number, serial ID, purchase date. 3 months before the incident. The judge nodded. Admitted. Daniel moved briskly. We also submit photos of the burned unit. Taken within an hour of the event. Time-stamped. Verified. The image showed charred plastic. The melted curve of the earpiece warped beyond recognition. Daniel placed the final sheet on the judge's bench. Witness affidavit from Nancy Holloway, present during the incident, and a notarized transcript of a voicemail left by the defendant in which she states, and I quote, "She doesn't even use the damn thing." The judge lifted an eyebrow. Defendant, do you have a response? Sabrina's lawyer, a bleary-eyed man from a mid-tier firm, stood and cleared his throat. We contend the action was symbolic, not malicious. That Mrs. Marsh has since replaced the device and— She had to, Helen interrupted softly. I didn't get a choice. Daniel gave a slight nod to the bailiff. Your Honor, he said, we also request permission for one more witness. Miss Gatt, Lily Marsh, minor but with direct observation and relevant verbal evidence. The judge glanced at Sabrina's table. No objection. Proceed. Lily stepped forward. She wore black jeans, a blazer 2 sizes too big, and a determined expression. She held a single sheet of paper but didn't look at it. I was at dinner that night, she began, voice steady. I saw my mom, Sabrina, grab the hearing aid off the table. She held it up and said— Lily paused, swallowed. She said, now you won't hear me anymore. Then she threw it into the fireplace. A sharp inhale rippled through the courtroom. Someone whispered, God, under their breath. Lily folded the paper and stepped back. The judge exhaled through his nose and looked toward Sabrina. Anything to add? Sabrina crossed her arms. She didn't even use it. Daniel stood. Your Honor, we rest. The judge tapped his pen against the desk twice. Verdict is for the plaintiff, Helen Lorraine Marsh. The defendant, Sabrina Rachel Marsh, is ordered to reimburse the full cost of the destroyed hearing aid, $1,248, and pay $1,200 in punitive damages for intentional destruction of personal medical equipment. He looked directly at Sabrina. This is not symbolic. It's sabotage. Judgment entered. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. Helen didn't flinch. An hour later, while she sipped tea at the bakery across the street, her phone buzzed. A new message. From Megan Carlisle, Local News. Now subject, Consumer Rights Column. Interview request, Ms. Marsh. I was in the courtroom today. If you're willing, I'd love to talk about your case. Elder rights, digital evidence, and personal accountability in family financial disputes. The story resonated with people, and we think it's worth telling. Helen stared at the screen for a long moment, steam rising from her cup. Then she typed, let me think about it. Truth deserves silence first. She hit send, and finally, smiled. The garage smelled like rain rot and old glue. A wet September wind pushed through the open side door, fluttering a long dead wasp nest nailed under the eaves. Helen stood just inside the threshold, keys dangling from her hand, staring at the rectangle of dusty concrete that had once held 2 metal cabinets. Gone. Not moved, not reorganized. Gone. She stepped forward slowly, her low-heeled shoes clicking faintly. A single coiled power cord lay curled in a corner like a shed snakeskin. The plug still plugged into an outlet. Nothing attached to it anymore. On the shelf above, a faded sticky note in her own handwriting still clung to the lip. Depot Mick, do not toss. Helen crouched beside the wall, running her fingers along the outline of cleaner concrete. Equipment had been here, expensive equipment. Her old court reporting mic system, the 4-channel recorder, the backup digital stenotype she never quite trusted but kept anyway. All of it vanished. She didn't cry, didn't even curse. She stood up, walked out, and called the police. By the time the officer arrived, late 20s, polite, just back from his lunch break, she already had the serial numbers typed out on a printed sheet and a folder of receipts in plastic sleeves. She gave her statement calmly, never raising her voice. The officer nodded as he wrote it all down, clearly thrown off by how precise she was. You think it was someone you know? He asked. Helen didn't blink. I think it wasn't a stranger. 2 days later, her insurance claim was approved. The payout posted directly to her checking account, digital, impersonal, fast. Almost surgical in how it skipped over the Y. She stared at the transaction line on her laptop screen and felt, what? Relief? No, something colder. The kind of stillness you get when the water rises too high for panic. Daniel met her the next morning with coffee and that tight-lipped expression he got when he was already building the next move in his head. This is civil pattern behavior, he said, flipping his tablet toward her. Same household, same target. Financial harm. You know how a lot of judges think. 1 weird thing is an incident. 2 is a pattern. 3 is intent. Helen stared down at the photo he'd taken in the garage. Empty shelves, that limp power cord. And you're thinking, criminal enhancement, she asked. I'm thinking this doesn't stop unless it's treated like escalation. She didn't disagree, but she didn't say anything either. Later that week, Eric came by unannounced. He stood halfway up the driveway, thumbs hooked in his belt loops like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to apologize or defend himself. Hey, he called, voice soft. I, heard about the garage thing. Helen didn't move from the porch. She had a rake in her hands, gloved fingers clenched around the wooden handle. That sucks, he added. She looked at him for a long time. Eric kicked a rock near his boot. I didn't know she'd do all that. I mean, yeah, she's been weird lately, but... He gave a little shrug, like maybe that explained it all. Helen turned and opened the screen door without a word. He was still standing there when it clicked shut behind her. The next day, Nancy showed up with 2 boxed security cameras from Costco and a roll of coax cable. No questions. No, you sure you want to go this far? She just moved with that efficient Midwestern rhythm. Up the ladder, down the ladder, peel the tape, mount the screw. Lily hovered behind her, arms crossed, eyes sweeping the driveway, the back gate, the line of oak trees that edged the alley. When the cameras clicked on for the first time, the screen on Helen's tablet lit up in 4 quadrants. Garage, side gate, front door, kitchen window, every angle accounted for. Lily watched it all quietly, chin lifted like a little general. Then she said, almost to herself, every click it records is proof. Helen didn't answer, but she sat down at the kitchen table and started logging the footage by hour. Nancy was packing up the boxes when her phone buzzed. Who is it? Helen asked. Nancy's face shifted. She handed the phone over silently. Unknown number 1. Voicemail. Transcribed preview. Tell your little friends their metal eyes won't save her. Helen tapped the play button, and this time she did flinch. Helen didn't sleep that night. Not really. The voicemail looped in her mind. Metal eyes won't save her. An ugly riddle that reeked of cowardice. But she never deleted it. Instead, she saved it to a locked folder on her desktop, made 3 backups, and titled it Entry 03, Threat, Voicemail Evidence. Then she made tea. Then she opened a blank document. By morning, she had a name. By lunchtime, she had a purpose. By nightfall, she had a meeting scheduled with the East Ridge Community Health Center. The clinic director was a wiry woman named Leslie Knott. Retired Navy, still wore combat boots under her slacks. She didn't waste time on sympathy. But she listened. When Helen slid the folder across the table, court verdict, insurance payout, the invoice for the destroyed hearing aid, Leslie's gaze flicked once, then stayed sharp. "Let me get this straight," Leslie said. "You want to donate the money?" Helen nodded. "Seed capital, for a fund. For anyone over 50 who needs hearing assistance but can't afford it. No interest, no judgment. Just help." Leslie didn't speak for a long time. Then she leaned back and exhaled like someone bracing for impact. Most people would spend that payout on a vacation or a nicer TV. Helen smiled without warmth. "I'm not most people." Daniel spent the next 3 days drafting the trust paperwork in his usual surgical style. Precise, airtight, and battle-ready if necessary. He met Helen on the back patio, legal pad in hand, blazer gone, sleeves rolled up. "This is a full 501c3 alignment," he said. "I've named it the Marsh Hearing Access Fund. That okay with you?" She paused, then nodded slowly. "It is now." He passed her the signature pages. "I've included language protecting it from personal liability. And yes, before you ask, I triple-checked the audit clause." Nancy notarized the whole packet right at the kitchen table, hands steady even as Lily watched with wide eyes. "I knew you were tough," Nancy said, stamping the final page. "But I didn't know you were strategic." Helen didn't flinch at the compliment, but she looked at Lily, and something settled in her chest when their eyes met. "You turned her cruelty into curriculum," Lily said. Helen didn't smile, but her breath caught, just a little, because it was true. Not spite, not revenge, structure. She'd made something that couldn't be burned. The press release went out the next week. Daniel handled the media contact with the same tone he used in court, controlled, clear, brief. By Thursday, the Sentinel had run a front-page feature. "Retiree turns loss into legacy. Marsh Fund offers hope to hearing-impaired seniors." The article included a photo of Helen standing in front of the clinic, her arm linked with Leslie's. Both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Lily had taken the picture. On Friday, the bakery slipped her coffee on the house. On Saturday, someone left a thank-you note under her windshield wiper. By Sunday, 5 people had applied to the fund. And on Monday, a letter arrived. No return address. Just her name, typed neatly on the front. Helen opened it with steady fingers, sitting at the kitchen table, cameras recording silently overhead. Inside was a single piece of paper, no threats, no insults. Just a Xeroxed photocopy of her old court reporting certification from 1986, burned at the edges, as if someone had held a lighter to it, then thought better. No note, no signature. Helen stared at it, then laid it flat on the table like evidence. Lily leaned in, frowning. "That's from your teaching box in the closet, right?" Helen nodded once. "The one in the locked guest room." A beat passed. Then Nancy said it out loud. "She's been in your house." Helen didn't speak. She stood up slowly, walked to the window, and checked the camera feed on her tablet. Everything was still. The yard, the gate, the fence. But her gut knew better. She turned back to the table. "Call Daniel. Tell him to bring the emergency order paperwork." Nancy hesitated. "Restraining order?" Helen's voice didn't shake. "No, injunction. She doesn't just want to hurt me." Her eyes landed on Lily. "She wants to undo me." The subject line read, "One mistake doesn't erase a whole childhood." Helen stared at it for a long time. The sender was Sabrina. No reply address. Just the gray bubble of a faceless avatar and a timestamp that showed it had arrived at 2:37 a.m. The hour of liars, drunks, and regrets. She opened the email, not because she wanted to, but because she was tired of being afraid of information. The message was short. "I don't know what you're telling people, but I never wanted this to get ugly. You were never easy to love, but I never stopped trying. I have a child who still deserves a family. Don't take that away because you want to feel powerful. No apology, no ownership. Just the same inversion Helen had learned to recognize, where the truth warped around the speaker like heat above asphalt. She marked the email as read, then she archived it. She didn't delete it, but she buried it, just like she'd buried 100 soft threats dressed up like concern. Daniel came by 2 hours later, a slim envelope in hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his expression unreadable. I updated the trust, he said, placing the envelope beside her mug. Added a no-contact clause. Any attempt by the defendant or associated parties to engage directly with fund operations triggers a formal cease and desist. Helen turned the envelope once under her palm. Good, he nodded. You sure you're ready for this level of firewall? She met his eyes. You think she left that letter as a peace offering? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Nancy swung by that afternoon with leftover bun cake and a box of printer paper she picked up from Staples, just in case Helen needed a refill. But she wasn't fooled. She watched Helen quietly as they sat at the kitchen table. You're doing the right thing, Nancy said eventually, voice firm. Grandchild or not, boundaries don't bend. They either hold or they don't. And if they don't, everything inside collapses. Helen didn't respond right away. Then she folded the paper towel around the last slice of cake and slid it into the fridge. She's rewriting things, Helen said, and she wants me to make room for the version where none of this happened. Well, Nancy said, standing, then let her rewrite it alone. That night, Helen found Lily sitting in the laundry room, folding dish towels that didn't need folding. She didn't speak until Helen stepped closer. I saw the email, Lily said, not looking up. You didn't respond. No, Helen said softly. Lily nodded. That's good. She wants you to be the villain so she can be the victim. That's her way. Helen sat beside her on the bench. The scent of dryer sheets filled the air, warm cotton and something clean underneath. I used to wonder, Lily said, if I'd grow up twisted too. Like it skips a generation and hits you sideways when you're not looking. Helen touched her shoulder. You won't. How do you know? Because you can see it. And people who see it early fight it harder than anyone. Lily folded another towel, perfectly square. Better a child with truth than one raised on theft. Helen didn't cry, but the breath she let out was deep enough to shake the silence. The Marsh Hearing Access Fund expanded in October. The clinic partnered with 2 satellite sites, one in Huron County, another just outside Madison. Word spread through newsletters, community boards, a shout-out from a state rep during a televised town hall. Applications tripled. The fund's homepage traffic spiked. And someone from a national audiology nonprofit reached out with interest in replicating the model. Helen met with them over Zoom, her old mic system now replaced with a newer, better one, donated anonymously. I didn't expect this kind of reach, the nonprofit rep said, especially not from a small-town launch. Helen only smiled. Turns out clarity travels fast. On a crisp Saturday morning, Lily stepped outside with a stack of outgoing mailers and saw something tucked into the mailbox that hadn't been there the night before. No envelope, just a single square of laminated cardstock. She turned it over, on the back, in blocky Sharpie. You can cover your ears, but she still hears you. The front was a doctored photo, Helen's courtroom hearing aid, twisted in Photoshop to look like it was melting. Lily stood frozen, the flyers sliding from her hand. Inside, Helen was pouring coffee when she heard the screen door creak open. Gran, Lily said, voice low. You need to see this. Helen set the mug down. And just like that, legacy turned back to threat. The ballroom ceiling shimmered with soft chandeliers, their glass petals catching light in measured civil pulses. It was the kind of room Helen had only ever seen on C-SPAN, mahogany trim, velvet seating, a podium flanked by flags. She stood at the edge of the stage in a charcoal suit she hadn't worn since the deposition workshop she'd once guest lectured. This time, though, she wasn't the one holding the mic to record. She was the one holding the mic to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, the host began, voice crisp over the house audio. Tonight, we honor individuals who've not just upheld the law, but moved it forward. Applause. Measured, respectful, real. Helen stepped forward. Daniel followed. His face calm, but sharp-eyed. Lily walked between them, tall for her age now, chin up, a quiet anchor. The moderator continued. For her foundational work, in what is now being drafted as the Marsh Amendment, a civil code expansion to protect elders from intrafamilial digital sabotage and property coercion, please join me in recognizing Helen Lorraine Marsh. The room rose. Helen didn't. She stood. Her speech was short, not because she lacked things to say, but because she learned the power of choosing what not to say. There are silences we carry, she said into the microphone, fingers resting lightly on the lectern. Because we've been made to. Fear does that. Shame does that. Familiar hands make it worse. She paused, gaze steady. But silence can also be chosen. And when you choose it, own it. It stops being something done to you. It becomes a tool, or a weapon, or a door you close for good. She tapped her hearing aid once, gently. I don't miss things anymore, not sounds, and not truths. The applause broke like a wave. Later, near the buffet tables, a man from the New York Law Journal approached her with a press badge clipped to his collar and a soft New England accent. You know, he said, flipping his notebook shut. Your case? It's already on the education circuit. A couple of law schools are using it for their professional ethics modules, teaching students how to spot patterns of soft abuse before it escalates into hard damage. Your affidavit's in the packet. Helen blinked once, processing that. She hadn't thought of herself as curriculum, just as a woman who'd kept the receipts, literally and figuratively. Daniel rejoined her with 2 glasses of something red and non-alcoholic. You know they're going to call this landmark, right? Helen smiled faintly. Then let them. Lily tugged her hand and pointed to the scrolling marquee above the stage. Marsh Amendment. Dignity through due process. For the first time, Helen allowed herself a long breath. Not relief, but recognition. From behind her, Nancy's voice came low and wry. You wrote your revenge and policy. Helen turned, eyebrows raised. Nancy grinned. Hell of a closing argument. After the reception, they walked the long hall toward the hotel elevators. The carpet softened every footstep. Helen's ears hummed slightly from the feedback of a room that had finally listened. Daniel peeled off to take a call. Lily walked a few steps ahead, thumb swiping through congratulatory texts. Helen reached up, adjusted the volume wheel on her aid by one click, and caught her own reflection in the mirrored sconce beside the elevator bank. She didn't look tired, she looked capable, like a woman who had rewritten her own ending, then started a new chapter entirely. Then her phone buzzed, not a call, a motion alert. She pulled it from her coat pocket and tapped the live feed. The backyard camera, front gate, garage, all still. But the kitchen feed was black. She frowned, tapped refresh. Still black. The system had failed only once before, during a firmware update. And this wasn't scheduled. Lily leaned over. Something wrong. Helen's voice was low, almost too low to hear. It's dark. She tapped the screen again. The feed blinked, flickered, and then for half a second it came back on. Someone was standing in the kitchen, not moving, just standing, facing the camera, holding something. Helen froze. The figure slowly lifted a large glass jar. Inside, something pale, soft. Then they held up a note, close to the lens, scrawled in thick black ink. She can hear you now. The feed cut out again. Helen's jaw set. She handed the phone to Daniel as he rejoined them. Call the police and then call the judge. Daniel didn't ask what happened. He just pulled out his phone. Lily's voice was steady behind her. This time, we don't wait. Helen nodded. No, she said. This time, we finish it. Helen typed the letter in 12-point Garamond, single-spaced, with all the measured elegance of a resignation note from someone who was never asking to return. No salutation, just the name at the top. Sabrina Rachel Marsh, below that. A date. Then a line break. I was informed through a third party that you've given birth. If true, I extend my formal congratulations. As trustee and founder of the Marsh Hearing Access Fund, I must clarify the following. The birth of a biological descendant does not, in itself, confer any right to benefit from the fund. Unless amended by the acting trustee or successor, the child is not and will not be listed as a named beneficiary. A certified copy of the statement will be filed with legal counsel and the charitable board for audit purposes. Helen reviewed it once, then she added a final sentence. This letter is not an invitation to correspond. She printed it on heavyweight linen paper, signed it with a black fountain pen, and sealed it in an ivory envelope. No perfume, no handwritten postscript, just the truth, folded neatly and sent by certified mail. At the dining table, she passed a second copy to Daniel, who arrived with his briefcase already open. He tucked it into a labeled sleeve without a word. Nancy poured coffee for them both. I've seen a lot of ways people draw lines. Some carve them in anger, some with guilt. But this, she gestured to the envelope, this is proof that love and logic can coexist. You're not doing this to punish her. You're doing this to protect what you built. Helen gave a tight nod. And to protect Lily. From the hallway, Lily's voice called out, "Protect me from what?" She entered wearing Daniel's old blazer from the courthouse days, too big in the shoulders, but it hung on her like a future. Helen didn't hesitate. From revision, Lily walked over and sat beside her. I know she had a baby. Eric sent a picture. Said her name's Everly, like it's supposed to be a clean slate. Helen didn't flinch. The paper might be new, but the ink hasn't changed. Lily nodded, serious. Then she reached for the envelope and turned it over in her hand like a sacred document. She'll read about you in law school one day, she said quietly. Helen's fingers brushed her new hearing aid. That's the only voice I need to hear. That afternoon, the certified copy was sent. Daniel logged it in his system. Nancy notarized the timestamp just in case. And Lily sat in the corner of the study, scrolling through a law library database on Helen's tablet, pulling statutes, highlighting terms she didn't recognize yet but planned to. The house was still. Tense, yes, but also still. As if it had finally stopped recoiling and started preparing. At dusk, the doorbell rang. Helen didn't move. She checked the feed. No one was visible, but a single envelope had been slid between the screen door and the front frame. Nancy retrieved it, gloves on, and opened it in the driveway under the porch light. Inside was a sonogram. No note, no address. Just the black and white image of a fetus floating in profile, its head slightly turned as if listening. Helen stood at the threshold, looked down at it, looked back up. She wants me to make it sentimental, Helen said. She wants you to let your guard down, Daniel replied. Helen took the envelope, walked back into the house, and slid it under the thick pages of her legal binder labeled Undue Influence, Documentation. Lily didn't say anything until Helen sat beside her. Then softly she asked, "Do you think she meant for me to see it?" Helen didn't blink. Of course she did. Lily looked at her then, not with fear, but with understanding. She thinks blood is an eraser, Lily said. Helen let out a breath through her nose. Blood is a ledger. That night, Helen couldn't sleep, but she wasn't pacing or wringing her hands. She was reading, quietly, methodically, page by page through the updated board governance protocols Daniel had given her. At 3:11 a.m., her phone buzzed. A new email, no subject, no body text, just an attachment. File name, Marsh Fund Exposures. Zip. Helen's hands hovered over the screen. Her hearing aid picked up the faintest buzz of Lily's bedroom door opening down the hall. She clicked forward, typed only Daniel, now, then hit send. She didn't open the file, but she knew who sent it, and she knew what came next. The hallway smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and orange-scented floor polish. A mural of sound waves lined the corridor, each waveform painted in vibrant blue and green arcs, echoing across the white walls like music frozen in motion. Helen walked slowly, her cane tapping gently against the tile. Not from necessity, but from habit. This wing, the new one, had her name on it. But she wasn't here for the fanfare. She was here for the sound, not noise, not static, not courtroom feedback or voicemail hiss. Real sound, good sound. A little boy in Spider-Man sneakers tugged his mom's sleeve, pointing toward the glass door at the end of the hall. Inside, 2 audiologists gently adjusted a brand new hearing aid behind his ear. The boy blinked, smiled, then turned his head toward a bubble machine in the corner, suddenly aware it was making noise. Helen exhaled slowly. The plaque mounted just beneath the entrance to the room caught the light. It read, Marsh Hearing Access Fund, founded by Helen Marsh, court reporter, Rattiwurst. Below that, because listening should never be a luxury. Lily stood a few feet away, filming on a handheld rig. She'd been gathering footage for 3 months. Interviews, clinic days, old trial archives, digitized clippings from the Sentinel and the Legal Dispatch. Helen had watched her once, filming a close-up of the plaque. She zoomed in, not on the text, but on the shimmer in the brushed steel. "You're going to win an award for this," Helen had said. "I'm not making it to win," Lily replied. "I'm making it so no one can pretend it didn't happen." Nancy joined them in the waiting room, handing Helen a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You turned a burned 8 into an amplifier," she said, sitting next to her. "I don't know how you did it," Helen sipped. "I didn't do it in spite of her. I did it after her." Nancy tilted her head. "There's a difference," Helen added. "Spite dies fast. Legacy lives quiet." By the end of the week, Helen had completed her final audit. She sat alone at her desk, surrounded by thick binders, organized thumb drives, and a ledger that spanned the full arc of the fund, from the first notarized gift to the last state grant signed under her stewardship. She flipped through the final pages slowly, checking every figure, every initial, every statement. Then she picked up a black pen, and on the bottom of the inside back cover, wrote in block print, "Legacy, closed." She slid the ledger into a fireproof safe, an old one Daniel had helped her install in the hallway closet, and turned the dial slowly until it clicked shut. She stared at it for a long time. Not with sadness, with precision. Her work wasn't undone. It wasn't challenged. It was finished. On her way out of the clinic that Friday, she paused just inside the lobby, where Lily was helping a tech adjust a mic boom for an exit interview. A father and daughter sat beside them, the girl no older than 10, adjusting to the sudden clarity of her new hearing world. Helen approached and knelt slightly, careful on her knees. "What's the first thing you heard clearly?" she asked the girl. The child grinned. "My dad humming in the car this morning." Helen smiled. "Good sound to start with." She rose slowly, turned toward Lily. "Let's go home." Outside, the air was crisp, and for the first time in a long while, the wind didn't carry the ache of vigilance. That night, over dinner, Nancy asked what silence meant to her now. Helen thought for a moment. The room was warm. Lily's laughter rang faintly from the living room where she was editing video. The house was sealed, secure, still. "I finally hear what matters," Helen said. "Quiet, that helps." Nancy nodded. "And what about the rest?" Helen tapped her hearing aid lightly. "It's all filtered now." Later, she stood by the safe once more. The binders were gone. The paper trail ended. But on the inside cover of her personal journal, tucked in the back pocket, she added one more note. Not for filing, not for Daniel, just for herself. She wrote it slow and spoke it aloud as the pen moved. "My daughter-in-law threw my hearing aid into the fire and laughed that I couldn't hear her anymore." A pause. "She was right, especially after I removed her name from everything that still speaks my legacy." Helen closed the journal, slid it into the safe, turned the dial, and this time didn't look back.